I am back in one of my favorite cities on the planet, in Amsterdam, in one of my favorite spots in the city, the studio of my dear, wonderful, wonderful friend, Jimmy Nelson.
And they said, you need to re-identify as an adopted Dutch person, because it's fresh to you, what traditional Dutch culture is, and put it on the map. This is the book on one wall, and this is the sort of three-dimensional digitalization of an experience.
And even between two villages, Volendam and Edam, which are now the same municipality, they don't talk to each other.
For me, of course, it shocked me. It felt to me like a costume party.
But it's how you show it and about keeping it in balance.
The trick really is how do we show the beauty of being human? Thank you for joining us. I am back in one of my favorite cities on the planet, in Amsterdam, and in one of my favorite spots in the city, the studio of my dear, wonderful, wonderful friend, Jimmy Nelson. If you have not been introduced to Jimmy, Jimmy was episode number 10 on slow-mo. And honestly, the episode that got me to think, this thing is good. This thing is actually worth the effort. This thing shares wisdom. Jimmy, like a typical Dutchman, started the conversation 3 minutes in after my introduction by saying, you said this wrong, you said that wrong, let me correct you and tell you a few things about me. And from there on, went to share some of the most amazing, vulnerable stories of his experiences as a world-renowned artist, photographer, who really captures the essence of humanity in so many ways. I came to visit Jimmy back in September 2021 when I published Scary Smart here in the Netherlands. And he said, come over, I have the finale of my exhibition in Paris, which was the Last Sentinels. You know, you will absolutely love it. Of course, I love Jimmy so much, one of my favorite humans on the planet. I wanted to go, and there was Prince Constantine with his wonderful daughter, Leonore, and he walked in. We had an amazing spectacle of beauty, of inspiration. And we chatted about how amazing this whole thing is. But it was exotic, I think was the word. When we looked at what Jimmy was exhibiting, the Last Sentinels, it was those people in unusual, what looked like costumes to us, but it was their reality. They were in the furthest ends of the universe, if you want, or of planet Earth. And I thought with COVID, as Jimmy would have to be grounded in a way, he wouldn't be able to keep doing this, and he wouldn't be able to find more cultures to tell us about. But he did. So he was telling me recently, back in summer, about his next work, and his next work has a lot to do with documenting humanity and culture in the places where we think those have been forgotten. I'll let him tell you the story. But I thought I'd ask Jimmy Nelson and Prince Constantine to come and talk a little bit about what it is to be human, what it is to actually find that tradition, find that culture, find that connection to our human self, even in the places that we go to every day. So thank you both for joining me today. Prince Constantine, thank you so much for joining us. Jimmy, as always, thank you so much for hosting me in this inspiring, beautiful place.
Well, I'm not quite sure what to say now after that introduction, other than
I said two things wrong.
No, you didn't say, well, yeah, debatable. I could say it was all wrong in all humility, but other than to say, thank you very much. I'm flattered, I'm humbled, but most importantly, thank you for being the catalyst of this new conversation, but also with you, Prince Constantine, because I think the theme of this is I'm an aspiring Dutch man. It's very clear to hear that I was not born here, but when I travel, which I extensively do, I call myself Dutch. I have a Dutch passport. I have more bikes than I will ever need. I don't have a car anymore, and I am nowadays, in a weird way, obsessed with this country. But I think it's extremely important to discuss that obsession, my way of outing that obsession. And I want to share it with you and show you some work in a little bit to see whether it could be valid or not. So I think that's the beauty of the conversation we're going to have.
Great. And let's agree that we say Constantine. We get rid of the Prince stuff.
What happened when we met the three of us in Paris. I had the honor, the privilege to have what was called the Last Sentinels. We'll eventually come to Amsterdam in the Atelier de Lumiere, that digital experience, that sort of art, culture, inspiration for all. We were standing there talking. Thank you ever so much for coming.
It was so
also
beautiful.
With your daughter. I think what was also very thrilling, it seemed to touch everybody, no matter what race, age, class. And
it was very Instagrammable. That's what the young generation liked too.
And then interesting is you said the world had was dealing with its pandemic. And strangely, because of the multitude of years I've spent in my life living with indigenous cultures, I feel in a humble, organic way, I've connected with a different understanding for myself. Again, it's very organic, it's very non-scientific. And as a result of that, I was quite calm when everything stopped. I didn't have the panic, which most people presumed I would have, that I wouldn't be able to keep escaping. And I think the simplest way to put it, and to avoid us being here all night, is that I had been looking the whole of my life and my whole adult life up until now for a place to feel safe, for a place to feel seen, for a place to feel acknowledged, and if I'm going to get a little bit wishy-washy early on, a place where I could be loved. We touched on this in the previous podcast, this journey I've been on. We're not going to go back there now. And as a result of the stillness, the silence, sitting here on the terrace of my studio right at the beginning, I realized I'm actually okay. I've found that place. And if I'm in such a good place, physically, metaphorically, and personally, the beauty, I remember speaking to myself, the beauty I've seen and witnessed and shared in the furthest reaches of the planet must be here, somewhere, somehow. And because of the silence, I remember listening to an invitation I'd had, which I'd ignored because of the business, to what's called an ijsbrouwloft in Marken. And it's a sort of a ritualistic winter ceremony where the whole of the village, of the island of Marken, dress traditionally and have a mass wedding on the ice. And I'd ignored this first invitation. So I thought, well, that sounds quite interesting. Why had I ignored it? As I've now got nothing to do and nowhere to go, I'm going to get back in touch with the young lady who invited me. And that was the catalyst for this new journey. So I literally got on my bike, drove outside Amsterdam, and within an hour arrived on the island of Marken and was introduced to some of the most extraordinarily beautiful, rich, poised, elegant human beings that I've ever met. And they run as parallel. They have as much wealth, as much dignity, beauty, as everything I'd experienced in Papua New Guinea or in Mongolia. And that was the catalyst of the journey. And they said, well, what are you going to be doing for the next few weeks/months, Jimmy? And I was sort of twiddling my fingers. And they looked at me very quietly and said, well, we're going to tell you what you're going to do. And that became...
They actually told you.
Yeah, indirectly. There was an organic conversation. And they said, you need to re-identify as an adopted Dutch person, because it's fresh to you, with your signature, with your heart, with your emotions, and all the love you have to give. You have to re-identify what traditional Dutch culture is and put it on the map. And that became the journey.
Quite Dutch of them to simply tell you what to do.
Yeah.
It's like, you arrive there, you're
Jimmy,
holding your camera.
Jimmy just remembers that part of the conversation when they asked him back after he could. It was a good idea.
And then it started, and then it evolved, and then a number of days photographing in Marken, and then somebody in Volendam, which is on the other side of the walker, rang, and I said, I heard you in Marken, you've got to come and visit us. And then it became a snowball. And then with my colleagues here in Amsterdam for the next 1.5 years, we travel around the Netherlands. And I can honestly say, and I'm always afraid of talking like this, but I think this is some of the most beautiful work that I've ever had the opportunity to make. But again,
that.
it's not my work. It's their work. It's their culture. It's their identity. But because I'm in such a happy place, to use one of your terms, I've seen it in a way that is not necessarily normally seen, or I've if I can humbly say, redefined it, put it back on the map, but as art, not as anthropology, not as journalism. I'm not laughing. I'm really respecting it.
Can I ask, as a person who's not Dutch?
Yeah,
I'm a citizen of the world. I've been exposed to many cultures, and I have to admit, the more I deal with the Netherlands, the more I feel the richness of the Netherlands. But if you're outside the Netherlands, you don't get a lot of bragging about being Dutch. It's quite interesting because you guys are all over the world. You're very, very successful business people. You've always been good traders and so on. But, the Americans brag a lot about...
We don't compare everybody to the Americans. They just have had the last century of exporting their culture, and the Netherlands has had their time to do that in the past, and we're not always that happy with it. So
interesting. So you choose not to talk about it?
No, I don't think we don't choose, but I don't think it's that explicit. And we're actually now dealing also with our colonial past, which we haven't done, and we should have done much earlier. And now we find that the footprint that we left on this planet is not always that positive.
But isn't that comparable to other cultures? The British culture, for example, which celebrates very strongly their colonial...
Yeah, and maybe they're also in for a time where they might reconsider some of that colonial past.
There was the Cannes Lions recently in the south of France, and the most golden lion was awarded to Vice magazine or Vice Media, and they have developed an app that when you walk into primarily to begin with the British Museum, and you shine your camera on an object and you press the button, it gives you the truth to its origins. And I think, in a way, it's not to make a comparison between the sea and the sky. We've also tried to retell a story, to be proud of something, but at the same time keep it into context of where it sits in history.
Well, I think what you did in the Netherlands, you have a very keen eye, because I think many Dutch people don't know what you have exposed. So
I'm beginning to find
that the richness of traditional culture and local villages, and the differences between villages, even within a village. Some villages will have an outer ring that is Catholic and an inner ring that's Protestant, and they don't kind of interact that much, and that still persists in this day and age. So it's something we generally don't know in the Netherlands of our own country. So sometimes you need the outside eye to unveil that.
That's really interesting. Jimmy, would you mind showing us? Because I would
love to show it.
I was blown away myself.
I would love to put it in context.
Yeah.
Come.
Great. Right.
Guys, come. And this is what I want to show you. It's in here. You've got to mind the plant. We adopted them the other day.
Oh, wow.
This is a sort of, if you come and stand here, this is a sort of a design studio. This is the book on one wall, and this is the pre-design for the exhibition, which should be opening, if everything goes to plan, in a couple of weeks' time in the Fabrique de Lumiere. And this is the sort of three-dimensional digitalization of an experience of the book, which is here. This is the layout. As I was saying, 20 different communities within the Netherlands who hold on still today to their heritage in an extraordinarily rich way. And the book and the stories and the maps are, as I perceive, very romantically, very indulgently. And then here on the table, we're looking, because it's all made on a 10:8 camera on this big plate film, extremely detailed, and we're testing the paper and the right ink. And here's the cover marker, seeing obviously the title, trying to sort of mirror into between the sea and the sky. And the book is it's not anthropological. We don't count buttons or zips. It's meant to be an inspiration to the cultural heritage that's still here. And what's extraordinary with this lady here, she's on the cover, her name is Tess. She worked here as a stagiaire and as an apprentice. And it turned out she lives in Marca. She's 25. She's redefined the dress of Marca, resewn it, rebuilt it, and has a whole community, and they're bringing it into the future. And she's also written an essay in the book, which is fantastic. I'm very proud of it. And so she, and also an extraordinarily famous Dutch author, which blows my mind, is Arte Japin, has written an essay. And his essay is very beautiful as well. He's often claims that the beauty of storytelling can't be found. And he's one of the best storytellers that exists in the Netherlands. And he kindly writes in his essay, we traveled together 20 years ago and I took him by the hand on a dangerous journey. And he concludes his essay by saying, Jimmy takes me and us by the hand again on a new journey.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
It's a beautiful essay, yeah.
Tell me about the exhibition. So,
well, the exhibition is what I was discussing earlier. It's a sort of a part two of what we had in Paris, which you both saw, the Last Sentinels. So it's in the Westergasplein here, and it's called the Fabrique de Lumiere. It's the sort of Dutch version of what's in Paris. They've spent a small, somebody spent a small fortune in rebuilding it, redesigning it for the next 10 years as a digital experience. So I'm very excited because I feel sort of as an artist, you can touch all audiences. So when you encourage people to visit Fabrique de Lumiere, it costs them 15 euros, much the same as in Paris. Everybody can go. They don't need to know who I am, what they're going to witness, what they're going to see, but they're going to go on an experience.
How long will it be on?
We start with a month, but it depends on the success because it's a bit of an experiment for them because I'm a living artist. And normally speaking, at the moment they have Gustav Klimt. I think next year Mr. Van Gogh is coming and I've squeezed in between the two of them.
but we now have the slow-mo listeners because they're all going, right? So
and it's an experience. And I think, and it's also a journey. We were mentioning it the other day. You can see, well, they're not here. It's this how you reconnect with the title between the sea and the sky. So this idea, it begins, I can't give too much away, it begins, we walk into the space, you're surrounded by 500 beamers, speakers, sound, and we're in the sea. And there's a storm, and there's the biggest storm that you could ever imagine. And it's a cacophony of nature, and we drown. Yeah. Don't get too upset, metaphorically. And slowly we go underwater, the bubbles come up above our head on the walls, and it becomes silent. Then in that silence, the piano starts to play. And then we rise and we are resurrected. But when we rise above the water, then it's dawn. In the distance, we see the dunes. But then we rise above the sea and we fly into the coast as either a seagull or, depending on your mood, an angel in the afterlife. And you are reintroduced to the Netherlands from above. And in the distance, you see the communities. Then you fly down as an angel or a seagull into the communities. Then we take you on a journey of connection with human beings.
From community to community.
From community to community in a storytelling.
For connection. I love that.
Yeah.
So it's not. This is not a just beautiful photos.
No, it's a whole experience. Yeah. It's a whole
and the last time when Prince Constantine we were in Paris, it was like what, 10 meters high or 5 meters high?
Paris was 50 meters high. Fabrique is also the same height. But I think the difference between the Paris installation with the Last Sentinels, that was all the indigenous cultures around the world, that was a bit like a rock concert, do you remember? We were dancing and that's quite eclectic and bombastic. This is a symphony.
Oh, beautiful.
And this is much like a feather, and we'll talk about feathers later. And it's much more about this balance of light, culture, because it's all very, very fine and very defined. And it's much more delicate. And it's extraordinarily beautiful. And I'm very proud and excited as an adopted Dutchman to have created this with my Dutch team and to give it back to the country that has adopted me.
Let's go talk about it a bit. But I want to ask you a technical question. Those photos with this extreme quality you take on film.
Yeah, I can show you the camera. Come. So we were talking about the pictures. They're all made on this camera here. It's a handmade 10.8 analog camera. There's one behind my back, which is as it traditionally used to look, but that's not necessarily portable. So a young designer in Italy designed this for me. We're all young or old enough, depending on how we look at it, for 35 millimeter. That was this big. The sort of Helmut Newton Hasselblad was that big, and this is a 10.8.
Wow.
So it's the largest portable sheet you can make.
Is that with gelatin or silver?
No, it's just film. It's film and a cassette, and then I develop it when I get back here, and then the lens goes in here. Why?
And the film takes one photo?
It takes one picture. So each portrait you see, or each photo, there's just one of it. Getting to that moment is a sort of an extraordinary investment. But as a result of that, you get very, very close to the subject, because the subject feels this utter adoration and unadulterated love for perfection. It's extremely difficult. But in that process, you focus your energy, your look, your attention, and the subject themselves rises. They rise to the occasion. And I started using it 4 years ago when I was traveling, and it's probably the definitive way of making contact, because the amount of time you invest in making the picture. The flip side of it is the aesthetic is mind-boggling, because it has a grain and a sharpness, and there's only ever one of them. So eventually they will be exhibited, or I aspire to have them, the images exhibited with the negative, and that'll be one unique piece. And then as a result of that, it will go and hopefully go onto the market and then raise funds for the foundation, which is this idea of reinvesting back into the culture, into the heritage.
Because how many of these, if you go to Africa and you take the...
I take one camera, I take 3 lenses, and I take about 30 sheets of film. So it's 30 moments of...
But you bring a normal camera as well, just as a backup?
Yeah, but I don't ever use the pictures, because having taken pictures from the age of 16... And now at the age of 54, I've decided I want less is more. And I'd far rather come back with one picture that everybody talks about rather than 10,000 images while spraying and praying.
But when you know...
You feel it.
It was...
You feel it.
Yeah.
You feel it. You feel it because you've invested everything into doing it. I can talk about it for hours, and Mo knows me very well. I can go off at tangents about very small. I was giving a talk not so long ago to a group of teenagers, and I was standing on a stage. They were looking at me as confused as you're both looking at me now. And they said, "Why do you use such an old, cumbersome camera? Nowadays, it's actually very easy." This young boy picked up an iPhone and said, "You can spray and pray," which I thought was a very nice analogy. So I said, "Well, you're right. 3.5 billion of us can now spray and pray." Yeah. And he says, "Well, that's the way to make a picture. Why do you bother doing this? Is it because you don't understand the technology?" And I said, "Well, I do understand the technology, but I'm trying to feel something differently." And he looked at me very confused, and I made a segue and said, "Well, what do you want to feel?" And spontaneously put his hand up and said, "There's a girl I want to kiss. That's what I want to feel." And I said, "Okay, well, let's talk about kissing."
Wow!
So all of a sudden, we went off at a tangent. So I'm talking to teenagers who've all put their smartphones down and now all listening.
Kissing, they'll put the smartphone
they put it down, and they said, "Well, let's talk about kissing." I said, "Fortunately, you know more about this than I do, but I'm going to give you 2 choices for a kiss, and we're going to put it into. You've got your first choice is your spray and pray choice. It's your iPhone choice. Tomorrow morning, you're allowed to go onto the school square." And everybody will say yes. You can kiss everybody all day. It's infinite. And everybody started screaming. And I said, well, the other option is the second kiss. But that's complicated. Because first of all, it's not a guarantee. So that's a bit of a downer. And so, well, let's, for the sake of argument, you get that kiss. But it's only one kiss. And that kiss you can't choose. And it will last about 2 seconds. Let's say the time of the shutter opening. At the end of the last minute of the last hour of the last day of the last week after a period of 3 months, which option would you choose for? So one is not a guarantee and you have to wait 3 months for it, not the guarantee. And the other one happens tomorrow and you can have it all. And they obviously said option 1. And I said option 2, because I've kind of got to the stage where it's not about the kiss anymore, it's about the process. And I don't think I will ever make that finite picture. But the thrill of the search, the investment, the emotional layering, aspiring to make it brings me closer and closer and closer to the subject I love, and that is human beings.
There was a Belgian photographer, and she used the 19th century technique, and because she wanted to capture more than just the image, also the dust around. So she took pictures of American natives and in a little village, and she actually brought a bus because she had to develop it on site. Yes, but you do actually see, which doesn't have the sharpness at all. It's very grainy, but the picture contains all that other
even
information. Which I also find very crazy.
It's quite interesting, the analogy of my engineering mind here. I'm all for that second kiss, by the way, even if it doesn't happen, as a matter of fact, right? Because it's the joy of that second kiss is to get to the point where you get the kiss. Do you understand?
I do, but I really believe, I don't think I don't think it ever happens. That's for me, finding the flow, finding the process, and to keep that flow sustainable forever, that passion alive. If you get given it, if you get given that kiss, the ultimate kiss you're looking for, you stop.
Well, is this the purpose of your podcast? We're kind of having three guys talking about the ultimate kiss.
No, but
two bald guys and a prince talking about.
But if you're putting it in
the ultimate kiss, you might not get.
Exactly.
But if you put it into what I was talking about a few minutes ago, I've been looking for a place to feel safe. I've been looking for a place to feel acknowledged in all my eccentricity, and as I thought not so long ago, inadequacy. This investment in the other brings one hopefully closer to a process of reciprocity. That is the journey I aspire to be on, and everything that I've been taught, spending all the last years living with indigenous cultures, especially in the Pacific. It's all about this reciprocal way of living, and this reinvestment in oneself, reinvestment in one's partner, reinvestment in one's community. It's a cycle. And this idea, the more I give, maybe the more I receive, but it's not necessarily, I don't receive in kind, I receive in humanity, and then I can redefine how I feel about myself through the eyes of the other.
Constantine, you were saying that those cultures exist today, that in the villages of the Netherlands, you would find what is not then, you talk about indigenous, Jimmy. These are alive, right? These are here. And I actually, when I saw the photos, I didn't believe that this would be the typical Dutch person, right? I mean, I wouldn't
say they're a typical Dutch person, but they are very typical, especially of the fisher cultures. So it's around, you find in the Netherlands, there's a central lake, which used to be a sea. And many of these villages would have very specific identities around this lake. And then also in Zeeland, in the south. So, and a number of those villages have retained their traditional dress and culture. And sometimes are, there's also different religions. I mean, you mentioned Marke is Protestant, and Volendam on the other side is Catholic. And they typically don't mix that much. And even between two villages, Volendam and Edam, which are now the same municipality, they don't talk to each other because they speak a different dialect. And Volendam used to be fishermen, poor. Edam they make cheese and they build ships for Amsterdam. And so they were rich. And typically the Volendam people would be the maids of the people in Edam. And then fortune turned around because people in Volendam were able to store their fish, and then there was a fish market, and then they became wealthy themselves. But still today, if someone from Volendam doesn't want to have a conversation with someone else and doesn't want to be spotted, they go just only a few hundred meters or maybe a kilometer further on to Edam, and they'll be sure that they won't meet anyone from their own community.
Well, as a result of this, and I was being told all these stories, and one community wanted to adopt me more than the other. And I said, well, when we launch this book, I'm going to make sure you all meet each other. And they're all, this is not going to happen, Jimmy. This is not going to happen. Well, on the 17th of September, we are having the book launch, which will be here in Amsterdam on the Museum Square. And at the moment, we have 1,500.
That's going to be unique.
In traditional dress. So it's free. In Dutch, you say vrijwillig. So we sent an invitation. We said, we'll send you a bus. Jimmy's going to be with the fire brigade. He's going to be in a little sort of bucket in the sky. He would like to make a national picture of the traditional communities in front of the Rijksmuseum. We were expecting 50. At the moment, we have about 1,500 people and many more who are aspiring to come on the 17th of September. Don't look worried. We do have permission. And I think it's going to be unique. I don't think it's ever been done before.
Don't think so.
And this idea of bringing it together as a community, and this idea of reconnecting, which I've been aspiring to do as an individual, having met all these other individuals, bringing them back together as one unique unit, as the Dutch...
So, I mean, you can tell much more about you studying them, but about these dresses. So in some villages, people actually still wear them daily. Others will use them for festivities, and others basically might have them somewhere on the loft in a big trunk, and rarely maybe the local dance club, when they do traditional dance, will kind of once a year, put on the costumes. But there actually are villages that are wearing these on a daily basis still.
I would say about half are wearing it on a semi-daily basis, and the other half is more traditional and an event. But it's much the same question.
There will be few people in the village that are wearing it permanently.
But if you go to an island, what's not an island anymore, of Urk, for example, there are more than 7,000 people who own the traditional dress, and regularly on a Sunday, they all make a procession around the whole of their village showing themselves off to each other. It's very beautiful. On Marca, there are 6,000 people. On Volendam, there are even more. So they may not be wearing it on a daily basis, but on regular occasions, many of them will put it on and come together as a group. And I think it's sort of much in the same. I'm often asked when I'm photographing indigenous cultures, is that as they look when you arrive? No, it's as I ask them to present themselves to me at their proudest. After spending, in many cases, months living with them. So if you're making a reportage pitch and you come in spontaneously, they may be wearing and doing something different. But that's much the same here in the Netherlands. So it was the same, come to me at your most proud.
Yeah, it's Netherlands is known obviously for its waterworks and reclaiming land. But these are some way the victims of reclaiming land. These will be very proud fisher villages, and they were suddenly cut off of the sea because we built a big dike, and then we started to reclaim land. So the town of Spakenburg used to have a sea in front of them, and now they have land in front of them. And the town of Urk used to be an island and is now on land. And Marca as well was an island, and now it's connected to the mainland. And so it has fundamentally changed their culture. But on the other hand, they seem to have had this urge to retain their culture. So maybe it's been the inverse happened, is that they got much prouder of their culture.
Yeah, you hold on more.
Because they had.
Yeah, it's a combination. You're right. It changed for many communities. It's this idea of reinvention, which I think is very important. So they all kept reinventing themselves. And I think it goes in waves. And what we discovered during the pandemic was everybody was at home, and a large number of young people wanted to who am I? Where am I from? Had time to start new conversations with their elders, so to speak. Started opening up the boxes and realized it was as a Pandora's box of treasure, of tradition. So, for example, the girl on the cover of the book, Tess, is from Marca. She is redesigning and redefining her cultural identity through the dress. And you will find that in many of the communities, there's a whole new generation that wants to redefine what they stand for. What does this clothing mean? What are the stories that it has to tell? And what are the stories we could perhaps tell in the future within our identity? So I think that stillness gave me the opportunity to see it, discover it's a bit of a big war, redefine it. In the near future, I will have the opportunity to show it, but for the communities themselves to be proud and say, this is who we are, and look at how rich and diverse it is. And then to discuss what's the significance of it.
So which one do we want? Do we want the tradition, or do we want the evolution and progress? I mean,
why would you choose?
In an interesting way, where I come from, tradition holds you back. So if in a society like the Islamic society, where rules are very rigid, you have to stick to things. Like it's known that after the Gutenberg printing press, the traditional Islamic community was like, no, we're not going to do that. That's not Islamic, if you want, right? And in a very interesting way, there is always that tug of war between, do I evolve? Do I continue to grow and change, but then I lose my identity, right? Instead of wearing those beautiful traditional dresses, going out on, fishermen boats and so on, now we wear hip hop clothes and we hold iPhones.
It's both.
You can do both. So basically, you have a choice. I got a whole group of friends over from all over the world. Ranging from Sri Lanka, Vietnam to Chile and Europe and Africa. And I thought, well, what am I going to do with them? We're going to be here for 2 days. How am I going to show them the Netherlands? So I went first to a town called Hoorn, which is a little village, which is like a mini Amsterdam. Used to be very rich. So you see that 16th, 17th century housing on the water, beautiful old boats for inland shipping. And then we took a boat, we sailed to Edam, which is this cheese town. Then went to Marken, which is, we already discussed, very traditional wooden houses, green painting. So, it's kind of the picture perfect tourist spot. And then we sailed into Amsterdam. and then you are in a completely different world. So we went to the Adam Tower, which is also a bit edgy. It's a music themed hotel with a club, and we actually had these contrasts, and they are just a few kilometers apart. And I think people like that. There is that choice, and the people from Volendam, they'll go out in Amsterdam, but still they also like their traditions, and it's possible. Also in a highly connected modern world, you have people within a radius of 50 kilometers of Amsterdam. You probably have most of the cultures that Jimmy has to photograph.
That's it, Jimmy. 50 kilometers. That's all.
I would say a large percentage of it. But then you've got Zeeland, which is a little bit further.
A little bit further, but close. You have.
It's not a big country.
No, you have all of the villages in northern Holland, which are.
I think it's within 120 kilometers radius. You have everything. But I think to answer your question, you're so right. It's both, but isn't both a balance? I think it's both. And if you hold on rigidly to one, you fall out of balance. If you completely ignore your history, your stories, your ancestors, your traditions, and you run into the future, you also lose balance. It's about both running together.
Yeah, and you'll have many people in Amsterdam that will have never seen anyone.
I think that's true.
I would say by far the majority of people who have no idea that this still exists.
No. I think that's why this work is quite interesting, because for me, of course, it shocked me. It felt to me like a costume party when I first saw the pictures, right? A movie, when you have the costume designer for a movie that talks about something from the past, but you say that some people actually live that way.
Okay, but it's much to say, if you run a parallel to somewhere like Papua New Guinea, the other extreme, it's one of the culturally most diverse places that's left on the planet. There's not too much difference. That's also a costume party. But because it's so far away, it's regarded as exotic. And even fewer people have visited. Yeah. But it's exactly the same. But what does that costume party say? Why are those costumes being worn? What is the significance of those costumes? And when you dig deep, it's exactly the same. It's about telling a story. It's a story of connection. It's a story of, in Papua New Guinea, they talk about it's a three-layered story. It's a three-layered of connecting with the ancestors, connecting with the humanity of today, and connecting with the cosmos. So that's the past, the present, and the future. And it's how you define your identity, your community, your value, your village, your language, connect with the Mother Earth, and next to three other aspects: prosperity, health, and aesthetic. So if you run those prosperity, health, and it's all the same.
Yeah. And you have in many, I think most parts of the world, you'll have large metropolitan or urban centers where people all dress a bit more, probably a bit more or less the same. And then very nearby, you'll have tribes, you'll have different cultures. Even in the US, I lived in Washington a bit. It doesn't take you far to Maryland to go to the Amish, and which have held on to their culture much more than I think the people that Jimmy has been portraying in the Netherlands, but because there's a whole life and religion around that.
But then I would say that's not in balance. That's leaning too much on the past. That's perhaps, as you were referring to in your youth, you were told about the past. And I would promote and sell and enthuse here in the Netherlands. It's done in a very balanced way, much as the Netherlands is as a nation. You can see some of the most advanced architecture in the world, some of the most creative architecture that's ever existed on this planet. Next to Marken and Hoorn, some of the most traditional houses and villages that you could ever imagine. The two are running next to each other, and both are valid.
Well, that is actually something, it's interesting you mentioning it. The Netherlands has done an amazing job in restoring and retaining heritage. So the 60s was a period where they tried to modernize everything, and I think they ran out of money. So a lot of the kind of the urban planning that could have destroyed a lot of the infrastructure didn't really make it. So at the time they would fill canals and make roads, and then at a certain point they stopped doing that, and they kind of open up the canals again. And so you'll find that these villages are very well maintained, and It's all bricks, brick clay. If you look at Amsterdam, most of the houses are all pretty crooked, but people are still living in them, and they're all, they are 300-400 years old, and some of the beam structure and the floors can be authentic, and so we have done quite a remarkable job in trying to maintain that heritage, and so you do have heritage alongside very modern architecture. And I think, it's something we don't notice very often.
No, but I think, and I'm obsessed with human beings. And I think as human beings in general, we tend to park the human beings and we worry about the planet and about industry and about commerce and economics, and we forget the source. Who are the ones changing all this? Who are the ones making the decision? It's us, the human beings. So I very much go back to basics and relook at the Dutch human beings, or a part of
what
those
is that? I was actually going to ask. I mean, so what if they're so diverse? I don't know if the picture is also capturing the character. Is there a Dutch human being across all of those wonderful diversities of tradition?
Good question. I have my contemporary opinion, perhaps, Constantine. I'd be quite interested to hear your opinion, then I'll share my opinion of.
Well, it's always difficult and dangerous to talk about identities.
Okay,
but I think
traits.
I mean, I can recognize a Dutch person wherever they are in the world.
I can too.
So I guess there is something specific. But on the other hand, it's also. I mean, Amsterdam has 190 nationalities, and so it's also parts of the Netherlands are a real melting pot. But is there something Dutch? Yes, probably. Probably we all share, I guess, common history, and there are definitely character traits that can be seen as typical. But
be direct, say them. That's what I love most about this place.
When I was struggling with directness, and I came out of a sort of a secretive past, and I needed to resolve that. I had a chip on my shoulder, and I remember when I first arrived in Amsterdam, two very profound things happened to me. And I think this sort of Amsterdam is extreme, but this is the Netherlands. The first day I arrived here, a man who was naked in the winter roller skated past me. He had a sort of 3x3 inch leather thong around his
I think
his
he's
penis.
still roller skating.
Yeah, I mean, he's a bit leathery now, but he's still there. And I was standing there as then I was pointing and yelling, "He's naked in his honesty," and nobody noticed him. And it's what, where, what, why, when? And then I thought, wow, you can be naked and roller skate through Amsterdam. The next day, I saw the only Dutch person I recognized, and that was a man called Jeroen Krabbe, and he'd been on a James Bond film. He was one of the baddies. And he was driving through the main park of Amsterdam, the Vondelpark, on the oldest bicycle you've ever seen in your life. First of all, I said, can't he afford a bike? And secondly, what on earth is this famous Dutch person doing on a bicycle? And that was when it began to dawn on me, this was a very, very different country. And although it was very close to the UK, which is where I was born, there was an opportunity to perhaps be oneself here. And providing you didn't necessarily get in anybody's hair, and I'm looking at you and Mimo, you were given the space and the room to read, to have your own identity, have your own voice, have your own character, find your authenticity within this sort of mini metropolis and thrive as a result of it. And another parallel analogy, I always struggled and felt in the UK when there was an issue, and people tended to close, this is in many societies, close the curtains, especially in the UK, have a cup of tea and talk about the weather. And I'd be going, but you've got to know what's going on. And I thought when I came here, they opened the curtains, well, they don't have any. So that was that problem solved. They sat in a window in a pair of knickers and smoked a joint and put on a red light and said, well, this is life. It's a little bit confrontational. Let's get on and deal with it. That's for me very Dutch. It's very frank and it's very direct, but it's very clear. And I love it as a result of that.
Yeah, I think I would slightly nuance that and say it's unfiltered. So the Dutch can just basically express themselves. If something comes up, you just throw it out there. So there's not a lot of diplomacy wasted.
But often it's the truth.
Yes, but but it's an opinion. So it's not so much. We're not that good at giving honest feedback. You know, we do avoid the kind of the hard conversation. If you don't want to bring somebody negative views. I feel entitled to say whatever I feel about you. But if I want to help you and give you constructive feedback, it might be a bit different. And I think what we are not very good at we are in kind of hospitality and generosity. We can be very generous in many things, but we don't invite people to our homes very easily. And so a lot of the foreigners or expats that are in the Netherlands will feel that it's hard to actually get behind the front door. So people feel they work, and you meet socially, but then you retract behind the front door, and there you want to be private. And our houses are not the places to receive people, actually, funny enough. Haven't you experienced that?
Yeah, to a degree, but as an adopted Dutch person, I sort of sit in a middle in a world in between. My ex-wife was half Armenian, so it was actually the opposite. We invited everybody in 24/7, and as a result, didn't have any money to pay for everything. But anyway, that's another story. So I sort of live in this sort of no man's land in between. But although I'm the one knocking on doors and off, I find it actually quite warm. I mean, I make an effort to do it.
Last time we sat together, remember we sat on that cafe, and there were the three Dutch people next to us.
And we just had a beautiful conversation.
And we were just immediately talking about Dutch monkeys. And I didn't know there was something called the Dutch monkey. Which part they were living in? New Zealand? Or somewhere. Yeah, and they were very friendly, very open, very... welcoming, I think, in Dutch. I didn't understand a single word, but
I mean, going back to the thrill of now living here for 30 years, loving living here, I will never actually leave here. This is my home. This is my life. Having the opportunity to discover it for myself. It was a discovery for me, and redefine it, reshow it to a nation, I think is extremely important. I think at this time and age when we're moving at breakneck speed, and I think I'm looking at both of you, you know much more technically about this than I do about the metaverse. We need to keep one foot very firmly rooted in what it is to be a human being. I think I'm too old to enter the metaverse, so I'm going to keep both feet firmly rooted in what it is to be a human being, and that's suffice and enough for me. But I think the generations to come are not going to do that. They're hungry for the future. And it's my responsibility as a budding artist or an aspiring artist to indulge, to show how rich it is to be that human, connected with authenticity and tradition, and whether it's in Papua New Guinea, Mongolia, or here in the Netherlands, because we're running at breakneck speed. And in 25 years' time, we don't necessarily, I believe, we won't actually have to make any effort whatsoever in our human. We can do it all in a metaverse. And that I find... You know more about it than I do, but I know it's going to happen, and I find it daunting. And that will go totally pear-shaped if we forget what it is to feel. And what I do and make and show is about feeling.
I think there are deeper human needs and values that will not bring us into a fully metaverse space. No. When I see our kids, they're much more digital than we are.
Lazy.
Yeah, but they're much more digital than we are. They're brought up with it, and they make choices. They actually.
You think we're strong enough to do that?
Yeah, they decide sometimes to put their phones away because they think it's more important. They play Fortnite and then it's over. They don't do it anymore. You know, and then they go out and do sports. I've seen it with my own kids. First you said, you have to go and do sports, and why are you playing these games? Spending so much time on telling our kids, what they shouldn't be doing. And then at a certain point, you just give up, and then they decide for themselves that they're done playing, and the Xbox goes into the corner, and then and they indulge in fitness or in cooking or I don't know what. They find something else, and so I'm in that sense I'm not so pessimistic. I think as you've seen now with your beautiful pictures, people crave for other things as well, and they will go looking for it. And so we don't know how it's going to work out. Definitely, convenience is great. I mean, you've experienced in your lifetime many inventions that we didn't, hold true before. I mean, the first time I got a job, that was the first time I was actually on email. And we thought, is that really necessary? Yes, probably it is. And now we couldn't even imagine what it is not to be connected, and the world would go down the drain if it happened. So that's just not true. And I think so. I think we will adjust. I'm not so pessimistic. Also because there are people like you And there will be always be people like you that want to show a different world and that are fed up with this. And
it's not to lovingly contradict you. I'm not fed up with it, but I want us to be aware of it. And
but that's because you are concerned. Maybe you're not fed up with it yet. They might be indulged now, and they'll get fed up with it and have another reason why they want to connect with something that's real.
I wonder though if those who will refuse to be part of this are going to be the ones that Jimmy will photograph in 25 years.
No, I might photograph the people that are completely indulged in the metaverse.
I mean, the reality is that if you take the analogy of where we are today as compared to those traditional fishermen, we've moved on to another way of life, if you want. And you have to wonder if, the younger generation will move into the metaverse and we will be those traditional people that actually walk.
Yeah, and this is what I'm wondering. I believe also we live in we're talking about the Netherlands at the moment, a very, very privileged country. And I live in a privileged neighborhood in a privileged country. Like you both, I spend a lot of time in other less privileged parts of the world. When a digital option is offered, that's far less work than surviving as a human being. I think more than less human beings will lean towards it. They won't be as inspired to go and play football or go cooking. That does worry me a little bit. But then at the same time, it's thrilling. Look at the technology we're using here today, how we connected to create this and how we're sharing this. But it's how you share it and about keeping it in balance. That's what. So telling stories.
I think that the trick really is how do we show the beauty of being human? Because in reality, I think the pressure on the other side, if you ask me, is really not a decision. It's also almost like fit in. If you don't fit in, if your friends are on Facebook and 10 years ago and you're not on Facebook, you didn't fit in. Will there be a time where if you're not in the metaverse, you don't have friends?
Maybe, but the ones who are on Facebook are the boomers of today, and the next generation doesn't use Facebook anymore.
What's Facebook? Yeah,
and they use Snapchat because it's fast and there's no memory. So
fast and no memory.
But no, because it has to do with privacy as well. And we thought that they didn't care about privacy. They seem to care sometimes more about privacy than many of the boomers do that are giving away everything they have, online just to.
What you were touching on a minute ago is beauty. That I think is the core element. How to feel beautiful as a human being. And I think there's a tendency at the moment, maybe I'm sounding like a sort of a middle-aged whatever, to not feel it, to believe that applying metaphorically a filter, that's I'm losing my English, voldoende, enough. You have to dig and invest deeply to feel that validity as a human being. And then when you feel that value, you can mirror somebody else's value. Does that make sense? And if we don't invest in that, and that's what these pictures are, they're beautiful pictures of very ordinary but extraordinarily beautiful people in alignment with a tradition. But we can all look this way if you feel it. That's what it's about.
Yeah, but even my daughter, she's kind of on. She has quite a number of followers on Instagram, and the reason why she's so popular is because she tells exactly that story. So you have to be able to be yourself. You have to show your vulnerability. Not everybody is a picture perfect version of themselves, and this is driving people crazy. So you have to be proud of, if you are your body, how do you call it, body positive, and proud of who you are, and tell that story and actually live that identity, and people seem to respond very well to that. So I think we don't know where this planet is going, but I think as long as we got people that keep connecting and telling the stories and finding a narrative and finding imagery like you have to show how valuable this is, people will reconnect with it again.
And that's, yeah, thank you. And that's all it actually is. It's not very scientific. It's just
to connect.
Purely to connect. And by default, through global circumstances, the connections I was making and sharing on the other side of the planet, I'm now making here within a 50/100 kilometer radius. And I hazard a guess that if you go to other countries within our neighborhood, which is the next journey, you'll find it as rich.
Yeah.
I think an important word is nostalgia, and it's not. I don't find this is not nostalgic. No. This is really this is living an identity, but it's something that can be explored and researched, and it's not. So you were mentioning before traditionalism, and nostalgia is part of that traditionalism, which can actually hold you back. And I think also in the way you've gone about this, it's very much kind of driven from curiosity, and you feel that, and I think that's important. It's not living the past. It's not dressing up to be something we used to be. This is something. This is dressing up to be who you want to be, and
who you are. Yeah,
and that's who you are, and maybe who you aspire to be in relationship to your parents or and maybe even your siblings and your kids later. And there's something you might want to pass on or not, or you want to give your kids the choice to do so or not.
I mean, it is so beautiful what you just said. It's the idea of I'm dressed this way because I want to belong to me, to what I actually deep inside am. So that tradition, of course, in a way has that feeling of camaraderie or social circle that I belong to, but it's also that moment where you define yourself that way as opposed to every other person's definition. You sort of say, this is me, this is how I want to be seen.
Thank you for the compliment, by the way. By interpreting that, it gets me very excited because I'm not nostalgic. I'm so not nostalgic. I'm so desperate and enthused and excited about what's going to happen tomorrow. You know me. But it's how we apply and what we learn and how we live tomorrow. That's what matters to me. And because I'm not a sort of technologically interested, I'm humanly interested. I want to bring forward these stories and these traditions with me in a contemporary way. And by default, a good 50% of the project are people under the age of 25 retelling their stories, what they discovered from their grandparents and how they want to define that and take it into the future. I think that's really, really exciting. So thank you for seeing that. So I must have...
How do you get to the one on the cover?
Tess was a wonderful lady. We were photographing in Marca. The lady who introduced me to this ice wedding said there's a young lady you have to meet who's right up your alley. This was Tess. Tess subsequently came and worked here for 6 months as an apprentice. She also had ants in her pants, so she went off traveling into the world, but she said, carry on this communicating what you're doing with this story with me. Further down the line, we said we're looking for an individual to put on the cover. We believe it could be you. Not only does she look extraordinary, she holds herself and she has a knowledge and a deep-rooted interest in the history of Marca and her traditions. And she's redefining and reapplying it and wearing it on a regular basis with herself and with her contemporaries. So she is a totem for the whole project and a fantastic representation. And it's an extraordinary privilege to have met her in such a beautifully organic way. But she's one of many, many, many individuals in the project.
And any other memorable stories, any person that stood out?
There are many. I think you want me to go down the alleyway. We're going to go to the other extreme, to a lady in her very late 80s in a village called Tolle in southern Netherlands and Zeeland, and Adrie Moorlands. And I was photographing the ladies in her group, and it turned out that she was suffering from severe Alzheimer's, but it didn't inhibit her in any way. It actually brought us to an extraordinary place because she was so free and so liberated and so forgetful and so fearless. She decided to take off her shoes and in full dress walk head on into the sea and started bouncing around like a child, making these most amazing pictures. And as a result of that, all these other ladies who went running after trying to save her realized that she wasn't actually trying to sort of, walk across the channel. She was just having fun like a child. So they all stood there bouncing around in the surf with me traipsing after them, making what I believe are some of the most beautiful pictures of the project. And I thought, wasn't that a wonderful way of sort of the cycle of life? We start with curiosity and trust and love for the world, and then we slowly enter sort of puberty, and life becomes layered. In some cases, we destroy it. And here we are in old age, returning to childhood, but looking the age and the dignity of the years that have passed. And with all the freedom and the curiosity and the fearlessness. And as a result of that, she dragged me and a multitude of other women with her into the surf, which resulted in beautiful pictures. But again, they're just metaphors. And many, many stories like that.
It's such a privilege, honestly. I mean, if we can slow down enough to just find that ability to connect to humans, especially humans that are a little slower in their pace of life than our constant strive to do more and achieve more. Someone that is able to, this probably is the biggest beauty I find in tradition is to be able to sit back and say, you know what? I'm going to stop here for a while and just bring back a beautiful memory.
But talking about stopping, turning back to this camera, this forces me to slow down, forces me to stop, forces me to look, forces me to align, forces me to focus, forces me to feel, because I can't see the pitch that I'm making. And in that, you connect with another human being. And my kids often mock me for the Dutch that I speak, which, having lived here for 30 years, is quite appalling. But whether it's in Papua New Guinea or Mongolia or here in Tolle, which is quite a strong dialect, you find a form of connection by slowing down. You reconnect with a rhythm. You listen. They see that I'm looking at them. They see that I'm there to in many ways adore them, and hence the beauty of the pictures. But the beauty is not mine. It's the fact that I slowed down and took the time.
Yeah, I think you took the time to be interested. Most of the time we see them as,
as a joke.
Not as a joke, but I mean, it's part of a touristic thing. People dress up in these dresses, and they, as many tourists do, and they take a picture. And without really taking the effort of diving a bit deeper into what's underneath. I mean, actually, recently we have it was the 1st of July celebrations of the end of slavery in Suriname and then in the Kingdom of the Netherlands. And there's a remarkable tradition. The party or the festival is called Keti Koti, which means the unshackling. And most people didn't care. I mean, this was going on, and they were, the people from Suriname wear incredible, also elaborate dresses, and they, and with a lot of tradition, a lot of different layers underneath, and it's just basically also unlayering or unveiling the different layers of stories around that heritage, and discovering that this is not a story of the Surinamese alone. It's a story of us. We are just as and I'm talking now we as a white Dutch person, though I'm kind of, my family is probably more German than Dutch, but still, we also are part of that history. And as a society, we were not challenged to actually explore that duality. And now, I don't know. I know there's some reasons why maybe now this is much more prevalent, and we are actually dealing with these things. And like I mentioned before, we're also dealing with our colonial past. Is that we understand that some of these kind of very visible things like the dress or like the Surinamese, like these things, have a counterbalance in our contemporary history, and we have to explore that too. And once you see that, it becomes so much more interesting. It's not just looking at a phenomena. You can look at these people saying, well, you have all these villages, and that's very beautiful dresses and beautiful pictures. And in fact, it also says something about us. What have we lost, or how have we moved on? What have we done to those people that we basically we said we needed extra land, and we took away their culture, their livelihood. And for no longer could they be fishermen on the seas. They were now dealing with a lake, and a lake has very different fish. And so that's these little stories where there's always the other side. And I think if you can also challenge us with a book like this to explore with ourselves what that other side of the story is, I think that's very valuable.
If you talk, thank you. But if you also talk about colonial past and the richest dressed communities are along the coast through trade, where does all the material come from? All comes from the East. And a large percentage, and that's part of the investigation, but where did this design come from? And you're in Hinderlopen, the city of Hinderlopen. I think there's only 800 people living there, but they refer to themselves as a city. I keep sort of getting slapped when I make that mistake. And by far the majority of what they wear is through trade with the East. So we've built that in over the years. So I think we all have a history. Positive and negative, whoever you are as an individual, a nation, a race, keep retelling the story, much the same as that app by Vice for the National Museum in London. Okay, it is what it is, but let's deal with it. Let's talk about it. Let's make it transparent. Let's bring it into the future. Okay, where does this come from? It comes from the East. Why does it come from the East? So it's not about stalling or being ashamed or as a middle-aged white man putting my head in the sand saying, I don't know, I don't understand, I am not worthy. No, I've been doing this for 54 years. I have a subjective perspective, overly romantic, which I'm not going to apologize for. And this is what I see and what I feel. And it's about love of human beings. It is very personal and it's open for conversation. But I think that's the conversation we all need to be having. Be continually interested.
I have to say there is such a joy in what you're saying, both of you, honestly. There is that joy of, Constantine, you said, slow down and be interested. I think that's actually a very, very valuable tip to anyone, really. Anyone that wants to connect to his loved one. Slow down and be interested. Anyone, the love of my life, Aya, my daughter, slow down and be interested. Stop running around and just, the time when we got the closest was when I started to tell myself, no more billion-dollar deals, no more running around like crazy. And my story was actually quite interesting. I used to go to Aya and pretend that I have a business meeting in Montreal and just stay in a hotel and wait and say, baby, do you want to go out for dinner? Do we want to go out for shopping? And just slow down and stay and wait until she, said, yeah, let's go to Deville, I think was the place we used to go to. And then the next time she would go like, yeah, let's go to Deville twice. And, and it's just slow down and be interested. I think that's how all human connections are made. It's so beautiful when you think about it.
We all want a wealth of experience. And I think in more contemporary society, we're encouraged that can only be achieved by buying it. And again, going back to the phrase reciprocity, you go to Volendam here, very close to Amsterdam. It's very famous. It's probably the most iconic headdress, if you want to refer it, where you can go and have your picture made. And you indulge in the Volendammers, who are quite precious people. And you get on your knees, which I do for hours, days, looking for that one kiss, which I never got. They start seeing the process. And then in a reciprocal way, you get a telephone call saying, well, do you want to experience something that nobody else has ever experienced at no cost because of what you've invested us? And you say, well, yeah, bring it on. The next day you go to Volendam and they've organized 6 botters, traditional sailing boats with more than 180 people dressed in traditional Volendam.
Oh my
and we're
God.
going sailing for the day and you're our guest. And you sail off at dawn into the IJsselmeer, our lake was a sea. And I have experienced something without in any way bragging. I don't know whether any of you will ever experience that. Now, you don't have to be into boats. You don't have to be into traditional dress. But if you're into sunshine, sails, music, singing, food, community, laughter, being embraced, that's what you get. And that's what it's all about. And I wish from the bottom of my heart, everybody could have a day like that. Then you would know what being a human being is. And one person is more beautiful than the other. And we got off the boats on the quay in Volendam and the sun was setting and I don't drink alcohol. And they dragged me into this bar, determined they were going to and we were all crying. And I cry nowadays fairly easily. I know a number of the men in there hadn't cried for years because it was such an extraordinary day. It was just so beautiful. And that's what it's all about. Okay, I show a picture and I have an exhibition and a book, but I was given something that is magical. And I want other people to find an opportunity to feel that. And it doesn't have to be boats on the IJsselmeer. It can be anything, but first you've got to give. And I'm convinced of that.
You know what is extraordinary in what you say. The modern way of achieving this experience is some form of a barter. It's like I'm going to pay for it, or I'm going to go with gifts or whatever. I'm a good business contact to keep. While the way you describe this is basically you sit there and admire them. Like, I'm interested. I want to get to know you. And then eventually they take you on a trip of a lifetime, just simply because you showed up.
But also because I want them to be interested in me. I want them to see you're important to us. You have a role in our life. There's a place for you here. That idea of safety, that idea of belonging, which was taken away from me as a kid, and then the whole of my adult life trying to crawl back to. And it's either here around the corner or it's on the other side. It's extremely important for me, but I genuinely believe it's very important for other people as well. And finding that organic path to feeling that connection.
Everywhere in the world?
Anywhere in the world. And that's by the irony, the beauty, it's within this sort of 50, 100 kilometer radius here. And achievable on a bicycle at the click of a finger. And still today,
50 to 100 kilometers is only achievable on a bicycle for a Dutchman.
No. But even the project the book is being published, and it was only 2 weeks ago, I was back in Marken because somebody said there's a triplet here. 3 young ladies who are 21, and you have to see them. You have to photograph them. So it's the best Saturday. So on my bike early in the morning, very early, having breakfast in the harbor, and then spent the day with this beautiful family making a picture, which won't necessarily come in this book because the journey just keeps continuing. Heaven. Getting on a boat, going across to Volendam, meeting my friends in Volendam, having a lekkerbek on the quay, and then cycling back into town at 6 o'clock in the evening. You can't have a nicer Saturday. And yes, I took a camera with me and I took pictures, but it wasn't about the pictures. It's just about having a nice, happy day, which is
happy connection. Yeah. All I can say is one more time, it's always such a pleasure. I have to say, I sat in this conversation almost as if I'm attending the exhibition. I'm almost listening to your stories and descriptions and how you see humans, those humans with all of their beautiful traditions and what they're holding on to. And it's just so amazing, really. I am, however, going to go to the exhibition. So if any of the Slow-Mo listeners want to bump into me on the October 13th, that's where you should find me. And yes, I do hug everyone that I see, and I will welcome you all there. I will give the final words to Constantine and Jimmy.
I would like to thank you both, but especially you, Constantine. I was having a little bit of a blue Monday this morning, and you've made my day it's often when you finish a project, you go into a bit of a dip and you think all this time and all this energy, will anybody like it? Is it just my mad obsession? And for you to come in here as the sort of, dare I say it, a sort of definitive Dutch man, and
that's the ultimate compliment I needed today.
I'm exaggerating for the sake of it, and to say this isn't leaning on the past, this is taking something very valuable and taking it into the future. You've made my day, my week, and thank you very much. Thank you both.
Thanks, Mo, for the opportunity to talk about something I don't regularly talk about. And Jimmy for showing us these incredible images and sharing your viewpoints and your wisdom around how you approach your project and the people you photograph. And by calling me ultimate something of a Dutchman,
definitive Dutchman.
Yeah, Dutchman. But
thank you very much.
It's not me, I know that.
DDM from now on. DDM we shall refer to.
Thank you ever so much.
To it here.
I love this conversation. I hope our listeners have enjoyed it as much as I did. There is poetry almost in every word that has been said describing the beauty of those humans. There is beauty in every human you'll come across. And I think that idea, you know me, I'm trying really hard to slow down more and more in my life to get that opportunity to reflect and really connect to myself, but also connect to life. I have to admit, the moments that are truly the most joyful are the moments where you slow down enough to be interested, whether to be interested in the traditional dress, to be walking around the museum slowly instead of rushing around because you just want to take pictures of the pictures, to be interested in humans, to sit down and listen. And so they take you on journeys that you've never really expected. And I love that idea of that mix between tradition and mix between progress, between modernity and between the old, and finding that balance that allows us to live a life that is true and authentic and convinced and happy of where we are, looking into the future without giving up on where we have been. And as always, you guys give me the opportunity to spend time with the most incredible people on the planet. So keep listening, keep watching, keep doing all of those wonderful things people do on social media. Share the podcast with others, rate it 5 stars, do whatever it is that you guys do. But meanwhile, if you're in Amsterdam on October 13th, come and hug me. I will see you there. And I will promise you it's going to be an experience that you're not going to miss. If you're not, take a look at Jimmy's book, September 17th. And either way, come back and join us, because I hope that both Constantine and Jimmy will be on Slow Mo very often. I love you all for listening, and I will see you next time.